Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike. Welcome to today's webinar with Gavin Ingham. Delighted to have Gavin with me for I Am 10 High Performance Methodology. Now, I met Gavin probably about 15 years ago. And in fact, I saw him speak somewhere. I was very impressed at his whole focus on, being a former big billing recruiter and how you can pull out even better performance with a tweak to your attitude. And you can access your attitudinal side to create peak performance. And at the time, I invited Gavin to join me filming at the Royal Geographical Society, which is where Charles Darwin made his famous speech on evolution years ago. And we had a camera crew of about 6 with boom mics on us, and we had to film those sessions in front of 200 people in one take to minimize editing. And that's quite a thing for anyone, really. Gavin came on stage and blew everyone away. He had the audience laughing, but more importantly, with key takeaways as to how you can draw more on your positive attitude and get better results from that. And since then, he's gone on to great heights. I'm a great admirer of Gavin's work. And Gavin, delighted to have you here today.
Pleasure to be here, Mike.
So let's get straight into the action. We've got good numbers on the webinar today. And if you have any questions for Gavin, please pop them into the chat room as we go along. And I'll be kind of hosting that and picking those questions up for Gavin as we go through it. But to kick us off, I've got a question coming in straight away in actual fact. Let me just...
No, that was me, Mike.
That's you saying just here. Okay. You're the stooge asking questions to yourself, Gavin.
Exactly.
Right, so here's today's agenda. We've done a little introduction and to repeat questions from the floor, really. So, moving straight on to the first question, what's the story behind this? I Am 10, love the name, indicates 10 out of 10 peak performance. What's it all about, please?
Yeah, the thing is, Mike, when I first started in this industry, so you said it was 15 years ago we met. I think it might have been earlier than that, but yeah, I started in the industry in 2001. And you're right, I'd been a high performing biller, and I wanted to get into, I was a director of a company at that point. I was managing a lot of people. I'd had success myself. I was helping those people have success. But the bit that was really giving me the buzz by that point was helping people improve their results, helping people with their mindset, helping people get the results they wanted. And as an organization, we'd always done training, we'd invested in training, but we'd only invested in skills training. And one of the things that I'd noticed was that working with the individuals, it was always the more mindset stuff and the more productivity stuff that was the difference that made the difference. I mean, obviously they needed to know how to recruit. They needed to know how to make a cold call back in those days. They needed to know how to take a specification or how to present a candidate. They needed to know how to objection handle. But how well they did that seemed to be down to the mindset. And in 2001, I was reading, 2000 actually, I think, I was reading the Sunday Times back in the day when jobs were in the Sunday Times. And one of the best jobs that I've ever seen came up in the Sunday Times. And it was for a high performance coach. And it talked about coaching and speaking on stages. And so I applied for this job and got narrowed down to the shortlist, and we all went and made presentations. And at the end, I got offered, 1 or 2 people, I got offered the job. And then unfortunately, September the 11th happened, and the company had a bit of a hit. And they said, look, we're quite happy to work with you on an associate basis, but unfortunately, we're going to have to withdraw our offer. We may well have to make redundancies because clients just aren't investing. So from that point where I thought I knew what I was going to do, in 2001, I was sitting there going, I really don't know what I'm going to do now. And it so ended up that I ended up being a sales trainer. And for about 5 years, I went out doing sales training, 2-day programs, 3-day programs, enjoyed it a lot. But one of the issues that I always had was, why did one person take a piece of training and go out and make it fly and another didn't? And from that came this big question of what is it that differentiates top performers? And the more I did, the more I realized that it was mindset. It was this ability to get yourself in the right state. It was this ability to get yourself in this place where you performed when it mattered. I think the reality is, Mike, that anybody can perform when things are going well. It's performing when things aren't going so well that's more difficult. So I started to train a lot of people in mindset, speak to a lot of people in mindset, work with CEOs right the way down to individuals, and started to formulate this simple methodology. Because another thing which I'm sure we'll talk about as we go through this session is that success is simple. And so if you try to make it too complicated, I had all these ideas in my head, but it's breaking it down to the simplest possible route so that people who are already busy, people who are already frazzled can take it out and they can work with it. And that's where this simple methodology of I am 10 came from. And obviously you're quite right. The principle behind I am 10 is on a scale of 1 to 10, being the best you can possibly be, i.e. a 10. And that's that really is the genesis of it and how it came about. And obviously I've spent the last 20 years since then refining, changing, improving, and also simplifying at the same time, Mike.
Well, it's interesting, Gavin, because you made a point there about or inferring that some people receive sales training information and go off and implement it and make deals and they're excited and positive. And yet other people see exactly the same material and blame the material, say it doesn't work. How do you deal with that kind of thing? Which what's your advice on how to potentially change those people's mindsets if you can?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure quite a lot of people have heard this, and you'll have heard this, Mike. There are 3 types of people in every training, of course. There's the people who sit in the training, want to learn stuff, and they ask themselves questions like, how am I going to use this? How would this apply to me? What's different about this? What am I not seeing in this? And that's the kind of question they ask. Then you've got the kind of the people who are just travelers. They just, they're just there. And they ask themselves questions like, do I like this trainer? Am I enjoying this? And clearly, if you ask those kind of questions, you're not going to get as useful answers. And then you've got the third group, and the third group obviously are the saboteurs. And they ask questions like, why don't I like this person? And where have I learned this before? And how is this repetitive? And I think a lot of the ability to apply training more effectively is getting yourself in the right mindset by asking yourself the same questions. I'm sure, like yourself, having done this 20 years now, I've worked with, I don't know, 150, 200,000 people. And, you do have these people who treble their sales in a couple of months. And you also have the people who do nothing. And so it's interesting to know what the people who get the results think. And so I always ask them, well, what was it? And I would love them, Mike, to say, well, you know what, Gavin, it was that super Jedi sales mindset warrior trick that only you know. But they never say that. They say things like, yeah, it was something I used to do, but I stopped doing it. It was something that I occasionally do, but I don't do it consistently. And I realized, you know what, if I did that consistently, that would make the biggest difference for me. So I think as you go through those training programs, don't ask yourself, do I know it? Ask yourself, do I do it? And if I did do it, what difference would it make for me?
Very interesting. Over the years, I've heard people say about a training course, so that was a good refresher. I think what they really mean is, I was taught this stuff 3 years ago, but I didn't implement it. And now I've had a wet fish slap me in the face and made me think that I need to do it. So there's a lot of psychology behind this learning piece, isn't there? And getting people to buy into, going down a different pathway.
I think a lot of it is learned ego, actually, Mike. You'll have been in the companies where they book you to come and do some training and you arrive and then they say, oh yeah, well, John and Mary, they're our 2 top performers. They're not here. They don't need to be here, which is setting up the whole aspiration of everybody else that actually when you're done, when you're cooked, when you're baked, you don't have to learn anymore, which is just utterly ridiculous because of course a true performer would go into a program knowing, if I can take one thing out of this, if I can make one distinction out of this, I think when you look at learning and the ability to learn and the ability to develop, you need humility, and I think humility is something that is just lacking in so many people, and it's easy, isn't it? I'm making a few changes around some of the stuff I do at the moment. I constantly train and read anyway. And I was chatting with somebody I respect, a speaker agency, and asking questions the other day. And she said, hey, look, I'm running this program next week. Why don't you come? And there was a lot of stuff in that course, Mike, that I learned 20 years ago, that I learned 15 years ago. 80% of that course, I'd probably do it. But there were odd little things in there, tiny little things that I think somebody who wasn't into learning, someone who didn't have a peak performance mindset would have said, well, is it worth on a Sunday night, leaving the kids, driving 4 hours down to Guildford, paying for a hotel, paying for a course, driving home, getting home at midnight before starting work again the next day to learn these one or two minor things? And of course, the answer is yes, it is, because it's those tiny little things. It's those little differentiations make the difference between being just good and being absolutely excellent.
Thank you, Gavin. That leads us nicely on to the next question. What are the typical reasons why individuals don't reach their peak performance?
Yeah, right. Well, there are many, many reasons, Mike. I don't think we can discuss all of them, but I mean, one certainly is ego. And I think ego gets in the way of everybody, but particularly salespeople. And I think part of the reason for that is that we get criticized so much by our clients, we get rejection. We have to form this thick skin, if you like. People are constantly saying to you, well, just get up and get on with it and don't take it personally, all that sort of stuff. And I think therefore we form this ego that it's quite difficult to then put it down and be honest with ourselves. It was interesting. I used to run a lot of open courses. At one stage we were running, probably 90 a year, something like that. And certain courses sold really well. So for example, negotiation sold really well. Presenting sold really well. Cold calling actually, interestingly, sold quite well. But that was more because bosses just sent whole teams of people. But the one that didn't sell, and it's just interesting, it consistently sold the worst, was sales. How to be better at sales. That wasn't the title, but that one just didn't sell. And I played around with the titles. I played around with the script. I played around with all of it, but it didn't make any difference. It was always the one that sold the worst. And the interesting thing was people would come on the negotiation course and you'd get into talking with them and you'd think the problem here is not negotiation. The problem for you is that you've failed to make the sale in the first place. But why didn't they come on selling? Because their ego said, that's my job, so therefore I can do that. I need the advanced stuff. And I think ego linked to this desire to learn advanced stuff. You know the kind of people, Mike, they sit at the back of the course, they cross their arms, they look skeptically at you and they go on then, Wormsley, teach me something I don't already know. And yet the challenge is that they've never practiced objection handling, so they can't objection handle properly, or they don't ask open questions when they're under pressure, or they don't prepare for their meetings properly, or they sit in work all day running around in circles because they've never bothered working out what a productive day looks like. And I think it's this ego attached to wanting to do the advanced stuff. I think people dismiss the simple stuff, Mike. Virtually everybody, I don't know about you, but have you ever really met many salespeople who didn't know what an open question was?
Not really, no. I suppose apart from, really raw rookies who have some basics explained to them, but certainly I'd say most people have got an awareness of it.
Sure. And yet, when you listen to calls from even quite advanced people, when they come under pressure, it's close question after close question after close question. And I think it's this ego, it's this looking for the advanced stuff, but then it becomes about not practicing enough. Because I think people hear open question, closed question, and they go, yeah, that makes sense to me. I've got that. But the problem is knowing something isn't the same as owning it. And owning it requires practice. That's why top sports people, that's why top performers in all industries practice really simple things. I think when you look at what makes the money, it's the simple stuff, doing it consistently and doing it over and over and over again. But unfortunately, people just don't put the practice in. It would have been dead easy for Johnny Wilkinson or David Beckham to say, I'm not going to practice this stuff. But when everybody else went back in, both of them, the one interesting thing they did was they would take a ball and they would put it down and they would go and practice all their basic kicks over and over and over, so that when they were trying to do it under real pressure, they were capable of doing it.
Interesting, Gavin. So are you kind of inferring then that it's partly an attitude to self-development that is out of place? And if so, what advice or tips would you have for someone to, who's managing that person to turn that around?
Wow, good question. So yes, I am. I mean, I think it's attitude across the board. I wasn't really intending to talk about attitude in relation to training and development, but clearly it's a very critical area. So yeah, I think what you need to do is explain it to people and talk to people. But I think where it then comes down, I think a lot of directors, a lot of managers, they don't see training and development as that important anyway. They'll do things like say, right, we're going to run one-to-one coaching sessions, and we're going to do them once a month, and we're going to have a training session once a week on a so-and-so day for 20 minutes or whatever. And then the moment anything happens, they drop it. Well, what's the message that they're sending back to their people with that? When they let their top performers not go to training, what's the message that they're sending to people? When they don't bother turning up at the training themselves, what is the message they are sending to their people? They're sending the message, well, I know it, and therefore I don't have to train. Well, do you? When did you last refresh it? How often are you doing it? How well can you do it? Why would anybody else do it if you're not doing it? Why would anybody else aspire to be something that you or the top performers aren't? So it's creating this overall top-down culture of believing in training and development and then actually doing it. It's not what you say you are, is it, Mike? It's what you actually do that defines you.
Very interesting. And also, the core that you were talking about earlier, the scale of 1 to 10. I think you can apply that to anything in any walk of life, can't you? Whether it's being a decent person to your family, whether it's working, in recruitment, headhunting, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best in the world. How good are you at headhunting, and so on? It's quite easy for any of us to look at a range of competencies or things that we should be good at, both in the workplace and outside the workplace, and then think, my goodness, I'm a 7 out of 10 at that. I need to improve it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, on a skill level, exactly, totally right. And also, on an attitudinal level, which is most of what I look at, Mike. So, you're right. I have people who come into a sales talk, for example, and yet they'll walk out with an idea about how they're going to approach their family or something like that. They'll realize, actually, the most important thing to me is my kids. And one of the things I would like to do is spend more time with them. And yet I'm constantly distracted. I'm on my phone, I'm taking calls, and they walk out and go, well, what is the mindset of a 10 in relation to being with my children? Well, it's present, it's engaged, it's interested. And then they set aside some time in much the way you would for cold calling, or you would for prospecting, or you would for negotiating, or whatever it is, or for learning. And they say, that's important. So what is the mindset? What is the behavior? What result do I want to get? And then they get on with it.
Well, thank you for that. The next question coming up is, what are the core principles? Before that, we've got a question in the chat room from Henry. Henry's saying, in terms of the 3 types of people you see in training, want to learn, the travelers, the saboteurs. So Henry's clearly taking notes there, which is good. Do you believe it's possible to move people from the 2 negative groups into the want to learn? And if so, how would you tackle that? So that's the question, Gavin.
Yeah, sure. I think to change, it's a big question, that, Henry, and there's no simple answer. The answer is, so the question is, do you believe it's possible to move people from the 2 negative groups? Yes, it is definitely possible, Henry. Is it always possible? No. One of the challenges we have in a work environment is that we're training people who probably didn't choose to be there. So they've not asked for the training. They don't necessarily want the training. They may not even think that they need the training. I remember about 15 years ago now, a friend of mine who's an NLP trainer was running a course, and he wanted to teach his NLPers how to sell. So he invited me along on a Saturday and paid me a bit of money, but I did it mostly because I wanted to work with him. I thought it would be fun. And I went. And I was just amazed, Henry, by how engaged this group were. They were taking notes, hanging on every word. And I was sort of in the back of my mind trying to work out why. And I realized, of course, because they're all learners. They've all paid their own money to come along. They're all bought into it. They're bought into him. They're in the middle of a progression. They need to be able to sell. And he's rolled out a guy who he says is the expert. And boom, of course, they're listening. Now, you will have people in your organization like that, and you need to invest time and energy into training them. I think often they get left, often they don't get the development and the support that they need, and I think that's a bad thing. I think the other two, you need to acknowledge where they are right now. So one of the first things that, I do as a speaker or a coach is place people in the situation where they are right now. So that is to acknowledge that there's no point coming in and going, right, we're doing this, if somebody's in a place of going, well, I don't believe that would work. So it's pacing people's scenarios and then gradually engaging them, engaging everybody from the top down and bringing in stuff that works. I think one of the other things that is part of that is one-to-one sessions with people. So do a session with everybody about what you went in to do, why you're intending to do it, but pacing out the 3 types of people in your introduction. Get people doing exercises around, what are we good at in the business? What are we not so good at? What do we need to improve? What are the benefits for all of us and for the organization around that? And spend some time on that as exercises, and then get people sharing it, and then get them to draw up their own development plans. That's one of the best ways to do it. Get people to draw up their own development plans, and then to actually get people doing that, but do the one-to-one first. You need to do one-to-ones with people, because I think one of the issues, Henry, and I'm covering about 1 million points here, but one of the key issues with engaging individuals is understanding how work fits together for them and getting them to think about it. Because if you think about it, a lot of people come to work, they're busy, they're motivated, they're frazzled, but they are just going through the motions. They're doing the same thing that they've been doing for years and years and years and years. And I think when you can help people understand and think about where they want to go and what they want to achieve, and then think about how they're going to get there, it just gives people that time to start to think about it, which refreshes them a little bit to move on. I think when you look at people, a lot of the time, people are just stuck where they are. But if you want to pick up that conversation anymore, Henry, I'd be happy to do so.
Some great tips there, Gavin, particularly like the buying people into the concepts, get them to talk about what they need. And you could even apply your I am 10 methodology on every aspect of what they do on a day-to-day basis. Get them to self-assess themselves on a scale of 1 to 10. How good are they, 1 to 10, at candidate referrals, with 10 being the best in the world? How good are they at handling objections? And break the objections down individually, right the way through the whole recruitment process. But Gavin, just want to move on to the next question now. What are the core principles of the I am 10?
Sure. One of the questions I ask people, Mike, is what makes a high performer? And people give you the words you might expect, like motivation and enthusiasm and tenacity and focus and stuff like that. And obviously the interesting thing about most of those words is that they are attitudes. And I think the way to look at this, I'm just going to write in in here actually. So attitude is your ability to access your skill. Attitude is, I can't type today, my hands are cold. Attitude is your ability to access your skill. And what I mean by that is that ABR, attitude affects behavior, affects results. So think about it this way. If you are, well, let's stay with the learning principles thing, because that's what we've been talking about. If you sit in a learning program and your attitude is, yeah, I know this, and your attitude is, well, I'm the real deal. Why am I here? It's rude that they've put me in here. Gosh, this trainer's rubbish, whatever it is. That's going to affect your behavior. And in that scenario, your behavior is going to be negative self-talk, asking yourself limiting questions, dismissing stuff that the trainer or the speaker has said as I already know that, et cetera, probably crossing your arms, switching the trainer off, etc. What kind of result is that going to get? Well, the result in that scenario is that you're not going to learn anything, obviously. And as you reaffirm to yourself that you're not learning anything, that makes your attitude worse, which drives more bad behavior, which gets you better results. Conversely speaking, obviously, if you sat in that program open, if you sat in that program listening, present, engaged, if you sat in that program asking yourself, how can I use this? How could this be of use to me? Then, the behavior is those more positive questions, and you start to notice things inside that training or inside that situation that you wouldn't have noticed if you were asking a different set of questions. Obviously, then you start to get a result, and that result in this case might be, really, I probably should structure my day a little better. I probably should think about what's important to me and make sure I get that done first thing in the day. And as you start to think about these positive things, that's going to make you feel better. So the interesting thing, which drives more great behavior, which gets you more good results. So the interesting thing, of course, is that most people end up being motivated from the outside in. They end up being motivated from the outside in. So they allow people, they allow events, they allow circumstances to affect the way they feel, whether that's, a candidate letting them down. I mean, there's a great example from recruitment. You've done all the work, candidate's been for interview, client rings you up, says, I want to make an offer. Candidate rings you up, says, I don't want it. And, how does that make you feel? Your instant response to that is probably annoyance, anger, frustration, probably a desire to turn it round. So what behavior will that drive? Well, probably not listening, pushy, too talkative. And what's the result? You're going to switch the candidate off. The candidate's going to get annoyed. They're certainly not going to open up to you about why they take the job, aren't taking the job, which means you're not really going to learn any more about the vacancy or about the client, or indeed have any chance whatsoever of turning them around. What's more, they're probably never going to use you again. We could go on and on and on. But that is a great example of what's happening externally affecting the way you feel, and then therefore affecting your behavior. The principle of a 10 is the best mindset, the best attitude in whatever situation it is, whether that's motivated or that's enthusiastic or that's determined. It's having the right attitude at the right time on a scale of 1 to 10 and taking responsibility for that from the inside out. As I said earlier on, anybody can do it when things are going well. It's doing it when things aren't going well. It's when it was the last deal on the table and you are going to miss your target and you are frustrated and annoyed and you do want to give them a piece of your mind. It's getting yourself into the right mindset so that you can access the right behaviors, so that you can make the most of that situation, whatever the most is. And that's true in that scenario. It's true in prospecting, it's true in negotiating, it's true when you're sitting with your children, it's true when somebody says something you don't like and you're about to have an argument. I could go on and on and on. So I Am 10 is about being in the right state at the right time. And I think one of the biggest changes in life is that with AI and automation and global competition, clients are looking for people who are the best. Clients are looking for people who can add value. And if you want any chance of adding value whatsoever, you have to be at a 10.
Well, that's on the money. The number of times I've employed people over the years, and invariably I've selected pretty decent people. Obviously, we get it wrong from time to time. Everybody does. But the ones who are negative early on, I'm already marking the exit door for them.
Yeah. Sure.
And they're difficult to turn around. But what you just said then sounds so logical and straightforward. How can you apply the principles so they become habitual?
I can't believe we wrote that question, Mike, really. There's like the whole of the I Am 10 methodology in that question, really, apart from what a 10 is. Okay. So I think one of the simplest things is to recognize where you are being impacted. And that's whether you're an individual or you're a leader. Interestingly, one of the outside-in motivations for a lot of staff actually is their leaders' somewhat dodgy moods, and somewhat erratic behaviors. So it applies to everybody. So if you're a leader listening to this, you can apply it both to yourself and your teams and with individuals. So most of the stuff, if we had time, Mike, and we said to everybody, all right, and this is an exercise, if you are a leader and you're thinking, how can I do this? This is a simple exercise you can do with your team. Just ask them to brainstorm. What could you do, or what might you do to get yourself to a 10? And just get them talking about it. And they're going to say things like take a break. They're going to say things like refocus. They're going to say things like exercise. They're going to say stuff like change your self-talk. And all of these things are good answers. Obviously they need thinking through and talking about how you would do it, but they're all good answers. And they're all things that we all probably do some of the time. But we don't do them all of the time. There's not any rocket science. You know, if you're sitting thinking, why me? Why does it always happen to me? Why does life always rain on me? Then it's fairly obvious that you need to change. You need to change that. As it's fairly obvious that when things are going really badly, getting up and moving around and getting yourself back into the right state before you make the next call or speak to the next client or the next candidate makes total sense. And yet people don't do it. So I think these things are simple, but I actually think the two biggest tips I could give to people would be: one, make a decision. Make a decision that you are going to commit to being a 10. You are going to commit to taking responsibility for your own mindset. I think when you look at people who come through my programs, the people who succeed versus the people who don't, probably the biggest difference is that decision. It's just the decision, I'm going to do it. Because if you can, you know, we hand out on the courses little wristbands, and people love them. And the reason they love them, not because they're magical, they are glittery, but they're not magical. But I believe that the reason they work is that they remind people of that decision. They remind people, and somebody will be having a bad moment and they look down, they see the wristband and they think, darn it, I've got to be a 10. And then they'll just do whatever they need to do to get to a 10. One of my favorite ways is just by asking yourself, how can I be a 10 today? Or I'm about to do some prospecting. How can I be a 10 while I prospect? Or I'm about to go into this training session. How can I be a 10? What does a 10 look like? What questions do I need to be asking myself? It's just actually having that conversation with yourself and remembering to do so, Mike.
Very interesting. You know, we had a speaker on a webinar recently who I also filmed called Molly Harvey. And she's a leadership coach who coaches Fortune 500 executives. She's spoken at the United Nations. So two pretty impressive accolades there. And she says she carries a how book with her. You know, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I do the other? And she works on her business and anything at all. And it's not a book for meetings. It's a separate book. There's how do I improve in this area? So you could even do, you know, an individual could even carry one of those around and then work on their attitude in their spare time, you know, outside meetings perhaps. Can you give us some examples, please, of areas where people have applied your techniques?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the things that I've learned over the last 20 years, you know, is that you can't roll as just work. Some people can, but it's a very small number of people. Generally speaking, most people have several things that are important to them in their lives. So, you know, work is one for sure. But family and relationships is one, and health and fitness is one. And so for some people, significant other comes out of family as separate. And you may have different wordings around those things, and you may have slightly different things. But for 95% of people, they're the kind of the core three: work, family, and health, fitness, whichever word. And I think I've seen people over the years only try and apply in work. And I think that's great. But I think where it works best is by thinking about it into all of the different areas. So, you know, I've seen people come into programs, as I say, and acknowledge, well, you know, I'm not a 10 when I'm with my kids, and wow, you know, they're 10 and 12, and wow, I ought to be, you know. I've had people come and say to me, well, I've got a 15-year-old and we've been banging heads. And I realized that actually a 10 is listening. You know, I'm thinking of what I was like when I was 15, and I just wanted listening to, you know, and I need to shut up, put my empathy head on and listen, even if what comes out is 15-year-old gobbledygook, you know, and then we work from there. And they've come back to me afterwards and said, you know, that's made a major difference with that. I've had people do the same with relationships. Likewise, I've had people think about it from a fitness perspective and how they apply themselves to that area of their life. From a work perspective, people who've applied it successfully are the people who've worked out where the most important areas are. I call these critical moments, Mike. So what are the critical moments that would make the most difference to your business? You can ask the same question the other way. What's the most critical moments that would make the difference to your family? You know, I'm 51 actually, Mike, getting old, mate. And I've got three little kids that keep me young. They're 3, 6, and 7. And, you know, running my own business, traveling around the place, you know what it's like. Actually, to be fair, I've got a fairly good work-life balance, but nonetheless, it's very easy to get into the day, another day, another day. We run them to school, we drop them off, we go to ballet, we do this, we do that, we do the other. And actually, I asked myself the question, well, you know, they're the most important thing to me in my life, along with my wife. What are the critical moments? And one critical moment I came up with, Mike, was, and I'm not saying this is right, it's just one of them, is dinner, right? And I said, I want us, when I'm at home, to sit down for dinner, all of us. I work from home if I'm not away, so I can knock off and do it. But the irony is, of course, it's easy. It's easy to just pick up a phone call at 5 o'clock, 5:30. It's easy to just carry on working. Whereas actually, if I've prioritized dinner, then I can go and do dinner and I can come back and work afterwards if I want to, or not, whichever, So I've prioritized dinner. And what I do with that is I thought through, well, what is a 10? What is the attitude? What is the emotion? What do I want to bring to that? And what would be the behaviors? And what is the result we're looking for? And then I focus on making sure that I get the results. So a lot of people have had those results in those areas. But likewise, you could ask the question about work. So what is the most important thing that you need to do in work? What's the critical moment for you? And then you visualize being a 10, what a 10 looks like, and the behavior. And Mike, I've had literally people turn sales round within weeks. I've had a guy treble his sales within 3 weeks. I've had sales directors turn their teams round and the attitude of their teams within, the program's 12 weeks, the big program, or 12 months, depending on which one. But even in the 12-week program, I've had people change things within 3 to 4 weeks. It can be rapid when you get it right, but it's hitting on what are those critical moments and then applying the 10 to that.
Fantastic, Gavin. I'm sure there's lots more we could go through with more time, of course. But I'm just thinking of my daughter's 21st birthday, which was recent, and I did a speech as a dad, obviously. And one of the things I talked about, was being the best you can be.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing to strive for, isn't it? How many people in reality are focusing on I am 10, being the best they can be in a range of things, personally, with friends, with family, in business. So I really enjoyed your wisdom, sharing your wisdom today. Look forward to working with you again, Gavin. I highly recommend people connect with Gavin on LinkedIn if you're not already connected to him. Look forward to joining you all in future sessions. Thanks again, Gavin.
Pleasure, Mike. Talk to you soon.